going to move right along. Next is Deputy Chief Hatch and Corey Hansen. They're going to give us a summary of our exercise that we had in September.
Thank you very much for inviting us here this evening. Corey's going to make the presentation on behalf of the Fire Chief and Emergency Management for New Westminster. Corey, I'll let you speak to the presentation, and after the presentation for the evacuation exercise, I can answer any of the questions that you might have.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Okay? Okay, perfect. So we held an exercise on September 26th. The proposed exercise was to validate evacuation strategies in the key. That's something that came up as a key topic in the key that you guys wanted to exercise. Participants include the Quayside Community Board, our community residents, local public safety agencies, and this basically we did a simulated release of a dangerous good because we know this is a big issue in the Quayside area, so that's something that we wanted to touch on and move forward and start planning for in that too, which we've done a lot of planning since then. So we had New Westminster Fire, the Police Department, Emergency Support Services, Salvation Army, Southern Rail, St. John Ambulance, BC Ambulance, and again the Quayside Residents Association, which became a huge part of this event. So we ran a scenario, as you can read, that came in from our 911 call center saying that a controller was down in a rail yard. And basically that there was a sulfur dioxide leak that was coming into and drifting towards the Quayside area. And basically the gentleman just reported that there was a pungent, bitter smell. He was able to remove the personnel from the area in the rail car, and the supervisors were notified of the situation. At that point, it came to the fire department that this call came in, and we started basically the situation from there. So for this scenario, there were two sort of moving parts that we used. Our fire department was able to work with Southern Rail and actually run a drill in the actual rail yard itself. And we were given a rail car that we were able to practice on so that we could contain the site and contain the area. And then the second part of it was we actually evacuated 2 high-rise buildings in the key and had them report to a muster station that we established. And these 2 buildings were great buildings to work with. They were very, very proactive, and we held many, many meetings in order to get this evacuation project moving and moving forward. And they were a great asset for our exercise that we ran. Our exercise started around 10 o'clock with our dispatch from ECOMS to our fire department. Our situation was assessed, and as you can see here, this is where our fire department came down, and the rail car at the very end is where they started assessing the situation. And at 10:20, the decision was made that the residents in the Quayside area needed to shelter in place. At this point, phone calls were made to the building management companies and to the people in charge of the building, the strata management, stratas, and we sheltered in place in the building. We went over the PA systems and we announced that the building needs to shelter in place. Before we did all this and actually did the evacuation exercise, the whole building was notified by their strata, and they put pamphlets and everything indoors. They announced it. We actually had one building who actually had a booth in their entranceway for a couple nights promoting that this exercise was going to happen so that their residents were aware of that. So there was a lot of proactive measures that went into this exercise before it was even to start. So this is just a picture of one of our ground monitors down towards the train. So volunteering and willing participants at 11:35 Quayside and 10 Laguna were asked to shelter in place for about 15 minutes or so, and then they were advised that they need to evacuate the building. So basically at this point, they would do it just like a fire drill. They evacuated outside to a designated assembly area. In total, we had approximately about 75 people evacuate in total. From there, they were given a muster station ticket, and they were told where the muster station was set up, and they walked. And the reason we used the tickets was to track how many people actually participated in the event. Normally, we'd just be told where you're going to go, but we need to track how many people are actually participating. So we had 75 evacuate, and we had 50 show up at our muster station. So it turned out to be a great exercise and a great learning experience. This was totally volunteer on part of both buildings. It did go out to all the buildings in the area if they did want to participate. But these two buildings, I know we had a third building and at the last minute they couldn't do it, but these two buildings were very, very much involved. So basically also in this, they also were then looking at their own preparedness levels and started looking at, okay, what are we actually going to do if we have to evacuate our building, and how would this actually work? Yes, we have fire safety plans in our building, and we know how these work, but what are we actually going to do as a strata to help the people in our building? And these are topics of conversation that kept coming up, and it actually led to some good conversations from the strata management company. At the muster station, residents were advised that they would need to check in and register, which they did with the help of our emergency support services team. They came in and they actually registered like they would for a regular event. So it was great practice for that team, which we work closely with in a big emergency or in a fire, which is also part of the police department in that too. We had Salvation Army outside as well, and they were able to provide refreshments, and I think they actually pulled out a full barbecue and had hamburgers and hot dogs for everybody in that too. So, and they're very resourceful like that. We're very lucky to have Salvation Army in our city, and I definitely have to thank them for that. So our exercise ended at about 11:40, and then probably about 20 minutes afterwards, we held a big debrief of the actual exercise itself. Some of the recommendations that came out of the debrief, because we had everybody there, was that there was some complacency in thinking that we were actually prepared. A lot of people didn't realize that they actually need to be prepared for 72 hours, and that if you're not in an emergency situation, you're actually okay, and the fire department and the police department do not need to come and help you. This is why we want to get stratas more involved in looking at emergency preparedness and getting their buildings prepared and ready for basically action if anything was to happen. They also basically looked at that residents need to have a better understanding, especially down here, of what shelter in place means and what evacuation means. Shelter in place is where you actually close all your windows and doors and you shut down the air system, and then basically you shelter inside your building so that you're not letting the fumes or anything into your building. Whereas evacuation, you actually are getting out of your building. So that's something that we need to work with. We've made brochures and that, and worked with the Residents Association, and we'll put those out again this year as well. Another thing that came out of it was that we're going to look at holding a forum and an emergency preparedness seminar this year, possibly during the week of Emergency Preparedness Week in May. That's to be announced. And we would invite the property management companies and the stratas from the area here to come down, and so they can learn a little bit more about information of how do they better prepare for their building, and how can they personally prepare themselves as well. There was also a large discussion about communicating out and pushing general preparedness in the community, and we stepped up our game a bit, and we are going to be stepping it up more, working with the Quayside Board to push that, knowing how to shelter in place, knowing how to evacuate, and ensuring that residents are prepared for 72 hours. Any further questions? Yeah, it was good. It was a good exercise. It was a very good exercise, and it's something that if the Quayside Board would look at doing it, we would possibly look at doing it again in the future. You guys were great hosts to our exercise, and we couldn't have done it without you, for sure, and your cooperation.
7 years ago, we did have an emergency on the Cape.
Yep.
And it dealt with the Fraser River. The height of the Fraser River being almost at record level. And the question is there any strategy also taking place if in fact that would be a reality of the banks overfilling? And secondly, the secondary part of that is there any strategy between the city and the Fraser River folks to remove that sandbar that's constantly building every day, and therefore, by default, the level of the Fraser, I believe, is rising?
To answer your first question, the city is very much on the ball when it comes to the Fraser River rising. We have certain levels that we monitor and watch for with our engineers. We also work with our engineering operations department because at a certain level, when it hits a certain level of the river, you'll see us start deploy sandbags. You'll see us start looking at the quay, and we'll start looking at great industrial area, because those are our two lowest areas that we look at, and we start bringing big blocks in, the sandbags. We we have a portable diking system and that too, we go into action in full force because it's something that we do want to protect, and we know there's a lot of residents down here as well.
That happened 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a reality.
It was a reality, and it can happen again. And you never know if it's going to happen or if it's not. Like even this year, we're getting a lot of rain, and even tonight, we have a rain warning, and we have a high stream flow advisory in place. And that's broadcasted on all through our social media and through our website and everything like that as well, because it's something that residents do need to be aware of. That this, like you said, it can happen. It can happen in a moment's notice, but we're constantly watching and we are prepared for that. We do have measures and plans in place.
The second one, what is the strategy of removing the sand that's building? Not enough concern.
The strategy for moving that, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. Unfortunately, that's the waterways, and that's part of Port Metro Vancouver, and that. So we don't have a whole lot of control over that. That's something that we have to further look into for sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.